Okay, so today we're joined by Fraser Cowie and Megan Marley, who are co-club captains of the sailing club at the University of Manchester. And they're a club that have recently developed having co-club captain roles after previously having just a single traditional club captain. So we're just going to talk a little bit today with Megan and Fraser about the benefits of that and also some of the drawbacks as well. So I'll kind of start it off with this. How did sailing end up having kind of two club captains doing the role together?
Well, our last club captain, the work that she was doing with SBS hours in comparison to all the other roles, including like the higher committee roles like treasurer and secretary, was a lot larger. And it was quite clear that our club could be split into two co-club captain roles and have that support for each other and kind of even out so that you could focus on university and running the club as well.
Great. And how did you manage to split that role? Because something that traditionally was just obviously done by one person, suddenly moving into two. How was that done?
So sailing's a really diverse club, and it's got sort of two ways that it was quite easy to split into. So my role as the co-captain is more focused towards the competitive team racing side of things, whereas Megan's role is more towards the more social sailors and encompassing the social aspect of the club as well as the financial aspect. And it's been quite easy to split it up. And I think one good thing we've done is sort of every week we've had just a 20-minute call where we just update each other on what we've done in the different parts of the club, and it's allowed us to keep everyone in the loop. And it's really useful to be able to bounce ideas off of each other as well.
And you mentioned there about kind of the two sides of the club. I guess at the times have there been challenges where different like the funding needs to go to one side, and how have you managed to like balance that?
Because it's quite split in terms of we have a lot of people who are completely brand new and learning to sail, and then in addition that was a completely different funding pot the the team race and the competitive side. And obviously with the new AU funding, we kind of had to look around and see what we could do and what we couldn't do. And this year's been challenging for sailing more than I think a lot of other clubs because we have to travel to Liverpool, so the restrictions have not allowed us to do any sessions. So in terms of like there's no crossover, and that's what is also a good thing about sailing is a lot of our people in teams will come and coach our start sailors and help out, so there's a lot of integration in the club where the funding is so different, but we try and keep it integrated in terms of people at the higher level helping out people at the lower levels to like mix the club up and give their expertise, and like hopefully also so that we can have progression in the club. So if you come in as a start sailor, or if you've done a little bit of sailing before, that by the end of your university you go all the way up. So that's
Yeah.
how we try and keep it mixed, and that's why it's also good for me and Fraser having the two roles of because I was a start sailor and Fraser's has always been on team, so we know what it's like in both aspects of our club, so that we have like a insight and knowledge, and we can help each other out to like guide what the other side of the club would think on an issue.
Yeah, so actually being from kind of two completely different parts of the club has had a huge benefit because you've got much more so than one because you've got that knowledge. So that's a really good point. And how well did you know each other before kind of undertaking the roles?
We knew each other from the club. Fraser was a fresher last year, and it was my second year, and I was treasurer last year. So we knew each other and we were friendly, but we like outside of sailing, we wouldn't see each other a lot. So it wasn't like we were close friends.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the things people assume with this is like, oh, well, you've got to be best friends with someone, but it's not always the case. Like just people you work with when you go into the professional world, you're not always best friends with the people you work with, but you can find really successful ways of working. So yeah, it's another great point. And then how has the kind of co-captain role, do you think, benefited the club and you also yourselves?
So I would say that, I mean, the main benefits for ourselves is that it allows us to still, give back to the club that we love, while sort of maintaining an easier sort of time management between our uni work and everything else, because it's just less work overall because we've split the role. But in terms of how it benefits the club, as Megan already mentioned, it gives us a broader overview as we're from different parts of the club, and it allows us to bounce ideas off of each other. And it just sort of gives us, it allows you to have someone else's opinion if you have to make that tough decision, which normally would be one captain making the decision. But if you have someone else there to sort of, help you out a bit, it really does help in the long run.
And then kind of looking back over the year, is there anything that you would change of how you split the role? Anything that you've learned over the year, or that you'd adapt at all?
I think it's been hard because we've not been able to actually do much. So a lot of the experience that me and Fraser have had from it has been quite positive, because especially at the start of the year when writing the risk assessments or stuff like that, that's when we'd have a Zoom call and we both do it together, and it was quite equally split. And I think another thing for other clubs would be, especially having if you're having two club captains with different experience levels or different areas of the club, or been in a club for longer and someone hasn't, because then you know people and the connections of like whoever you're training in. So we know the people at West Kirby quite well. I think if we were gonna change, I'm trying to think what would.
I would say the only thing that I could potentially think of is obviously the one part of the club where we have overlapped quite a bit would be to do with the progression. So we have a development squad, which is intended as like a feeder for teams. And we both ended up at the start of the year being quite involved with that, which it had its positives, but it also made it slightly confusing at times because we were both talking to our D squad captain, who's the person that's actually responsible for running the day-to-day part. So maybe just setting a slightly clearer, I guess, boundary about what parts of the club we were more responsible for. And that's only a minor issue right at the start.
And I also think the big thing is with the finance changing in the AO is if you have two club captains where they have a different sort of areas of the club with different funding, obviously because of the way that it's all changing, to sit down and have that discussion at the beginning of what you are going to do in terms of the finances for the whole of the teams, because you are at the end of the day responsible for the whole club and not just that section, and finances can be have a big impact on the club. So if you sit down, although you might have one club captain who has got their teams completely funded, if you both sit down and discuss how the funding is going to work for your third, fourth, fifth, any social things that you do to kind of help that out, and then once that's sorted, then it's a lot easier to kind of split everything else.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining today. That's really useful, and hopefully some other clubs can take that and potentially implement a similar structure down the line. Thanks a lot.